What's up, guys? Welcome back to the Strong.Sistas YouTube channel. Today I had the great pleasure to interview and talk with Mr. Will Harris and Jenni Harris at White Oak Pastures. They are great friends of the Strong.Sistas, and we have visited White Oak Pastures a number of times. They've honestly been a huge influence and motivator and supporter of us entering regenerative agriculture and starting our own farm. So in case you guys are unaware, White Oak Pastures is a regenerative farm in Bluffton, Georgia. Mr. Will Harris converted his conventionally raised cattle operation into regenerative operation a little over 20 years ago. White Oak Pastures is doing amazing thing. They're sequestering carbon. They've been shown to operate at a net carbon negative, so you guys should definitely check them out. In this interview, we cover a wide range of topics, but I think one of the most important things that we cover is what someone else who's not in farming can do for the regenerative agriculture movement, and that ultimately is to just continue to educate and share information about regenerative agriculture to others. Something that we touched on offline, I wish I was recording, Jenni Harris brought up a great point. So many consumers are really into and tied to the idea of consistency, getting the same product over and over, but they're also really into this idea of like order and consistency. So they drive past cornfields and they say, wow, what great farming. Look at how perfectly aligned those corns are, how they're all level. And so they're just kind of used to monocropped fields as like the standard of what's great for farming. And so we've got a lot of work to do on the education piece to create a more informed consumer base in order for this regenerative agriculture movement to work. So I really hope you guys enjoy this conversation. Mr. Will Harris and Jenni Harris, thank you so much for joining me today. Appreciate it. Let's start off with a simple question. So briefly, who is Will Harris and how did White Oak transition to implementing regenerative practices? Specifically, someone asked, how did you even discover regenerative farming without Instagram?
Well, I can assure you it was out without incident assistance from Instagram. Will Harris is me. I am the fourth generation of my family to own and manage this farm in and around Bluffton, Georgia. And about 25 years ago, I started to become increasingly aware of the unintended consequences of the industrial monocultural cattle program that I was operating. It was profitable. We were living comfortably, but I just liked it less and less. Animal welfare was kind of the canary in the coal mine the first thing I noticed I didn't like, so I started changing things very intentionally. I later focused on the land and started changing things very intentionally, and that's how we got here.
And can we briefly touch on some of the conventional agriculture practices? I think that you, Mr. Will, have a great way of talking about how they came to be and then some of the consequences that we're dealing with because of them today.
Yeah. So with reference to the land, what really caught my attention was the fact that I could walk in my fields and the soil was a dead mineral medium. It looked almost like a parking lot, like you found in a dirt parking lot. And just right over there in the edge of the woods, the soil was a mineral, it was an organic medium, it was just teeming with life. It was just two different infrastructures, almost like two different planets. So I wanted that to look like that. And even University of Georgia College of Agriculture C student could put together that the difference is this land was being cultivated and fertilized with chemical fertilizer and sprayed with pesticides, and that land was not. So we backed off those practices, and we were cattle people. So using animal impact, to benefit the soil, which is essential to regenerating a dead soil. it was something that we were familiar with. So over a 25-year period, that land went from a 0.5% organic model to 5% organic model.
I read your recent blog post, and I really liked how you phrased something. You said, "We now must accept that whatever is good for our planet will be good for us." And you commonly talk about how nature is really complex. Can you kind of dive into that a little bit? What do you mean by specifically what's good for our planet and how it's good for us?
So for the last 80 or so years, I think World War II, post World War II, was the game changer for a lot of reasons. But it was essentially in about 80 years, we've used technology to really push the human agenda. We have really changed the way we live in every sense of the word. We could talk about it all day, but you understand that as well as I do. And when we made all these changes, we just assumed that it was without impact to our earth and our environment. It impacted us on a model that we found pleasing, and we thought that would be okay. What was good for us would be fine for the earth. It hadn't worked out that way. These reductive, these lifestyle changes that we made have been very reductive and very polluting and very, just damaged the earth in many different ways. And so, that just hadn't worked out well. So now it's time for us to rethink it and say, okay, we're going to do for the earth, and that will be good for us because it's where we live. There's no plan B. There's not another planet we can go to when we use this one up. So, we got where we are through technology. So this path over the last 80 years has been made possible by technology. And technology is a function of reductive science. That's how the research is done to build, design technical systems, technical tools. And reductive science works great in complicated systems. It doesn't work very well in complex systems. A complicated system is like this computer. A complex system is like your body. In both cases, complex and complicated, there's a lot of stuff going on to make it work. There's a lot of stuff going on in this computer so that we can talk, a lot of stuff going on in my body and your body so we can carry on our daily activities. In a complicated system like this computer, if one component ceases to work, it's game over. It don't work no more. It shuts down. In a complex system like our bodies or this farm or whatever, with a lot's going on, a lot of things are happening to make it work. But if one component shuts down, everything morphs and it continues to operate.
I love that.
Reductionist science doesn't work well in those systems because of unintended consequences. Reductive science does not anticipate unintended consequences. So, and that's the reason we've had drug recalls. It's the reason we've had pesticides that got banned. It's the reason we've got pollution. It's the reason we've got black mold in that house. It's, all these unintended consequences come from applying technology technology came from reductive science. So that's what we did. We applied the reductive science to one of the most complex systems in the world, which is a farm. I mean, Jesus, just all kind of things going on out there. And when we apply reductive science to it in the form of pesticides, chemical fertilizers, subtherapeutic antibiotics in your animals, hormone implants, there were unintended consequences. And then unintended consequences were almost always unnoticed, and they were almost always undesirable.
So you make the analogy like nature and human bodies, they are complex, whereas computers are complicated. And in these complex systems, it's almost silly of us to think that we know everything about it and that we can set these external rules or external sprays and be able to control it all. So that's a great segue into kind of like more of the plant-based agenda. And so Jenni, as director of like marketing at White Oak, are you guys afraid of, not afraid, I guess, are you fearful of any of the like plant-based agendas ahead of us, like the meat tax or like these lab-raised meats where they can just take bovine cells, put it in this little circle and grow meat? Are you guys concerned about that in the future at all?
Concerned is not the right word. In fact, I think that it helps consumers focus even more on the foods that they're eating. Back before plant-based meat substitutes, it was sort of like high animal welfare protein or factory farm, and those were kind of the two. Those were, it was one or the other, and there were people who investigated it and people who did not. I think that the rise in plant-based protein has caused consumers to do even more research, and I think that's a good thing. I think that there are consumers who will always support animal agriculture because it's it's bigger than just the bite of meat that they're putting in their mouth. They want to create jobs. They want to use animal impact to heal the soil. They want to advocate for farms with high animal welfare. So, I don't believe that any of the customers that currently support White Oak Pastures that are embracing all the benefits of regenerative agriculture will even consider plant-based protein. And I think that the need for plant-based protein was brought on because of the ills of the commodity food system, and the more awareness that we raise with regard to how destructive that is, the better off regenerative, resilient food production systems will be.
And it's brought to you exclusively by reductionist science.
That's exactly right. And there's the other part.
It's highly processed. So I got a good idea. I got a real good idea. Let's quit eating what we've been eating for tens of thousands of years and start eating something that we're making in a laboratory, probably the same laboratory that made DDT. And let's eat it instead. What could go wrong? I don't believe anything could go wrong with that. I think it's a hell of a plan.
Agreed.
Yeah. So Jenni and I were talking offline. So you have this group of people who want to be plant-based and want to be vegetarian. And I kind of thought that it was for the environment. So they legitimately think that, animals are bad for the environment, specifically cows. And so therefore these plant-based alternatives are better for the environment. Jenni brought up a good point that she thinks that it's the biggest reason why there's like vegetarians and plant-based and people are against eating animals is because of the act of killing animals. They're uncomfortable with the thought of killing animals. I know that this applies to my mom, for example. In these type of situations, how do you guys explain the cycle of life? Because I know that is a challenging thing for someone to explain to someone else why they consume meat from regenerative sources.
Now, let's talk about cycle of life. That's important. But let me preface it by saying that, I don't want anybody telling me how much meat I should or should not eat, and I would never tell someone how much meat they should or should not eat. If a person tells me they're vegan or vegetarian, I think it's great. It's a lifestyle choice that everybody gets to make. If they tell me that they're vegetarian or vegan because they just can't stand the idea of eating what was a living animal, I respect that. I get it. That's fine. If they tell me they just don't like the taste, that's fine. If they tell me that the mouthfeel is yucky or whatever, that's fine. But I will not accept it's better for the environment. I will not accept it. That's wrong. You can have your own choice. You can't have your own facts. And eating a vegetarian diet, vegan diet, especially with newer plant-based proteins, is not better for the earth. So we talk about the cycle of life, right? Birth, growth, death, decay, birth, growth, death, decay, birth, growth, death, decay. It's a cycle. It's been going on since the beginning. What's true is that every living thing has died or will die, whether that's you and I, or amoebas, or sequoias, anything that's lived will die. Number two, every living thing lives by eating something that's lived before. You can't eat silica and live. You got to eat something that was once living. That's true, plants, animals, microorganisms. And the third thing is, in a healthy ecology, nothing stays dead for long. You die, something consumes you, death, birth, death, decay. Now, in the case of vegetable-based proteins that we're talking about these days, they're farmed as a monoculture, and a farmer farming a monoculture of soya or wheat or corn is killing a pest almost every day. And that's what they do. If you have a monoculture, you invite pests, and then you kill them. You kill them with pesticides. When you run the combine over the harvesting, you kill mice and frogs and lizards and insects. I mean, that's not, things die so that we can eat. So I reject that out of hand. If you run a regenerative farm, multi-species farm like this, you're looking for a way to make things live every day. A monocultural farm is killing things every day. Multi-species regenerative grazing is making things live every day.
And I think that's something that some people forget is like, there's like two different sides of this animal agriculture, and a farm like White Oak Pastures, you guys are giving these animals the best lives they would ever have. Like, they're out in nature, being able to practice their natural instincts, live their best lives, dig up the ground and go forage on the best grasses there are. And then I think that it's really cool that you guys have designed your processing facility with animal welfare in mind. And you had Temple Grandin, right, help kind of design the processing steps and processing facilities, so that way the killing process is as seamless and as humane as possible. And that's just like, it's just not fair to clump regenerative agriculture such as White Oak Pastures with feedlots or confinement buildings. It's just like two completely different games. And so it's kind of frustrating to, I guess it's just the scope is lost. And so people just zoom in on a specific topic and they don't realize that there are two separate things.
You mentioned meat tax briefly.
Yeah.
And that would fall into what's broadly considered to be a sin tax. You pay tax on tobacco and alcohol and other things that are deemed to be harmful. And I've heard a lot of arguments about it, but I kind of understand sin tax. I think that it's a good way to fund the government that helps shape social behavior in a way that society thinks is pleasing. I think that's fine. But if you're going to have a sin tax, you need to tax what's simple. And the way we've got a study done by environmental engineering firm that says that we're sequestering carbon. To charge a sin tax here is way wrong. There's no sugar tax. We should have a sugar tax.
Yeah, it's like
we talk about meatless Mondays. They never talk about sugarless Sunday.
You guys have that Quanzer life cycle analysis, which shows that White Oak Pastures beef operation operates at a net carbon negative. And how is supporting the beef operation at White Oak Pastures sinful when you're sequestering more carbon than is being emitted by that operation? I think that that's something that we should celebrate and be rewarded for. It's kind of opposite, but unfortunately, you guys get clumped in to just like general meat consumption. Jenni, for like the director of marketing side, what advice do you have for other farms? because something that I've really realized is you can be the best farmer there is out there, but if you aren't able to move and sell product and deliver that product to your customers, you aren't going to really move the needle forward and have a profitable business. What's your biggest piece of advice for small regenerative farmers when they are facing these, like, for example, proposed meat taxes? So what like marketing strategies can they help by promoting and incorporating more people in their area to support them?
So the answer to the question is not necessarily a marketing one. I think the marketing department's job is to accurately tell the story of what is happening. You know, it's storytelling, and it's education, and it's in the moment, in the day, and that's just general marketing. I think the word of advice is advice that we give often, which is don't fall in love with one part of the system. You know, if you really love to raise livestock, it's just one piece of the puzzle. There is also, you know, a processing piece which has to be dealt with, and a marketing and logistics piece which has to be dealt with. And so the best marketing advice is, since marketing is kind of the last link on the chain, you think about processing, you think about production, you think about processing, and you think about marketing. While marketing is important, there are two very important things that have to happen prior to even talking about what you have.
Yeah.
That you should have well under control.
Yeah, that's a good point. Okay, so slightly shifting gears a little bit. I view you, Mr. Will, as like a land flipper. So you buy these conventional ag, so like, you know, the HGTV, they buy those old homes, they flip them. You don't sell your land, but you buy these conventional ag fields, and you guys have now over 7,000 acres. Is that correct?
There's 3,200 on the farm here, and a little 1,425 in solar arrays, and there will be another 2,770 in solar arrays. So it's
Approaching 7.
Okay, so that's incredible. So you purchase these conventionally agged fields that have been row crops for so many years, and then you convert them into these beautiful perennial pastures. And Sarah and I have called your grass Harris green grass. And I personally think that process is going to have to happen more and more, because we can't continue to create new land. Land is well sought after now. For example, like Bill Gates now owns like an incredible amount of acres. And so it's just being bought a lot. And so we're kind of stuck with what we have. And so I think this conversion of row crop fields into perennial pastures is going to have to happen more and more in the future. And so I just have some questions about like the land revival process. I know you guys do seeding each year. And so you plant seeds, diverse cover crops, so that way you have biodiversity in your grasses. You do seeding each year into the row crop fields. And that's something that we will be doing on our property, because our fields have been used for conventional row crop for 10 plus years now. I just am having a little bit of like an issue with the actual process itself, because I personally think that regenerative organic, that label is really powerful. You're sequestering carbon into the soil, and you're also not using any synthetic fertilizers, pesticides, all of that. But I have been told that in that conversion process, when you have your row crop field, you do your seeding, you're going to have to use synthetics for a year or two and wean the fields off like a drug addict. You got to wean the drug addict off the drugs over time. Do you think it can be done without that weaning process? Do you think that the row crop fields would be successful with just seeding, no-till seeding, and kind of just letting weeds and whatever seeds actually prosper come up over time?
That's a great question. And while I don't do it that way. I don't go through that weaning process using some ammoniated fertilizer during that. I think it's perfectly acceptable to do so. I think that. So one of the problems, I guess the two main problems, I could come up with some others, but two main problems with using chemical fertilizer is, Number one, it oxidizes the organic matter that's in the soil. And two is it's very damaging to the microbial population in the soil. Well, if you've got a piece of really degraded farmland, there's no organic matter to oxidize and not much microbial life to damage.
Yeah.
So there's very little downside. You got to get off of it, but there's very little downside initially. Now, the upside of using it is you can get a lot of plant material going quick.
Yeah.
And I think that's just fine. In fact, we did some seeding for the solar company that we work with, Silicon Ranch in Nashville, Tennessee. And we did the seeding in some degraded farmland where they're going to build a solar voltaic array in a year or so. And we spent a lot of money on seed, and it's just not doing much. It's sprouted, it came up, it's not dying, it's just not growing. So I'm going to go back to them and tell them that we cannot put chemical fertilizer on it. It'll be fine. We're moving in the direction we want to move in. I think we move much quicker if we put a small amount of chemical fertilizer out there, grew more vegetative material to put back into the soil.
Yeah.
And there's not a right and wrong answer here, but I think that the quicker route would be to put a small amount of weaning fertilizer out 1 year. That's not the way I do it. I'm blessed with at least two things. One is a large herd of cattle that I can put on the land, this degraded land, and feed them a lot of hay there, which takes the place of that chemical fertilizer. During the dormant season when nothing's growing, I call it hay bombing. We'll feed a lot of hay on the ground for a 6-week period. A lot of wasted hay, those cloven hooves pushing into the soil, a lot of urine, a lot of feces. In all these events, what we're trying to do is jumpstart the cycles of nature. Mm-hmm. Industrial commodity farming has broken the cycles of nature, and we've got to get them going again.
Yeah.
Cycles of nature being, to name a few, mineral cycle, water cycle, energy cycle, carbon cycle, mineral cycle, microbial cycle, and those have got to be reinvigorated for the land to start producing the abundance.
Yeah, because I can imagine what's going to happen on our fields. We plan to do just like use a no-till drill and do seeding, and I'm starting to do the calculations for like fertilizer, herbicides. And it's just so expensive. And so I am tempted to just do no-till seeding and just kind of let whatever grows come up. And I'm guessing a lot of weeds will come up, but our plan, which was originally suggested by you last fall, was to get lamb out there in around August. And your reason for the lamb was because we only have 22 acres. You want to get ruminants out there. They're the most powerful animals in helping with reviving and getting that cycle of nature back. But cows can be a little bit destructive if you don't have much acres to move them around to. And so you suggested starting with lamb. And I think that's a great suggestion. And we're going to move forward with that. And I know you guys originally started with cows and you've now added in lamb for your solar grazing. So regenerative, renewable energy. The sheep are grazing underneath the solar panels. So that way the people who own the solar panels don't have to spray all those chemicals. And so the sheep, it's like you're the landscaping crew that's coming in. So now that you guys have had lamb for a few years now, I've heard that lamb aren't as picky with grasses. And so potentially like the lamb being out there with some of the weeds would be okay. And they would potentially eat the weeds. Curious on your kind of experience, because I know your solar panel fields were on like poor soil before that.
Yeah, well, you'll find that so you got the ruminant animals we have here on this farm are cattle, sheep, and goats. And goats very much are browsers. It's really best if a goat can only eat from here up, if they don't have to bend down and eat. That's just, they do better and they'll eat a lot. People say goats eat anything. No, goats don't eat anything, but goats will eat more shrubby, woody species. They'll eat bark. Goats are great. They're forest creatures. Cattle on the other extreme are truly pastured creatures. I mean, they do really well on grass. They need some forbs, but grass does them very well. They utilize it. They turn cellulose into beef very efficiently. And then sheep are in the middle. They can't make it out there where those goats are. It's just not enough for them to eat that they prefer. And they don't do as well out there just on that grass like with the cattle. There are a lot of forbs, clovers, those kind of things that you would call weeds. A weed is just a plant that's growing outside its place. And they're sheep will eat more of them than cattle. And there's nothing wrong with mowing if you have to. Mowing is, I don't like it. I mean, mowing is expensive, but it gets the undesirable plant knocked down so that it can become plant material and break down. And it's an expensive thing to do, but there's a place for mowing. We don't want to be mowers. We don't want to do that much. Like we don't want to use chemical fertilizer much, but there's a place for it.
Yeah. Yeah.
As a transitional tool.
Yeah. So based on your experience, do you think that the sheep would potentially eat some of the less desirable plants?
I think so. I'm not familiar with your ecosystem, so I don't know what you have that'll grow there, but I would be willing to bet that the sheep would eat things that the cattle won't.
Yeah.
And I would also say that, you're going to really struggle financially with the infrastructure for cattle with 22 acres. You got to have a way to find them and handle them. And that can be done so much more cost effectively with sheep.
Yeah. Yeah, I really appreciate your insights last fall. I think that that's a great starting. We're going to get egg layers. So we're going to be getting a lot of chickens out there to hopefully get a little bit manure out there to be somewhat of an organic fertilizer. But then we hope to get the lamb out there in like August or so. What has been, I know you've been you guys have had cattle for many, many years, and you've now just incorporated the lamb the last 2 years. What is the biggest learning lesson you've had from your experience with the sheep so far?
What's true, I thought, my father was the best cattleman I've ever known. I've been in the cow business all my life. My degree's in animal science. I think I'm a good cow man. And so I assumed I'd be a good sheep man. That's not the way that works. Each individual species has its own impact to the land. It also has its own husbandry. And the fact that you know a lot about cows don't mean you know a lot about sheep. And when you know a lot about sheep, that don't mean you know a lot about goats.
Yeah.
There's a lot of nuance out there.
Yeah. What has been the biggest challenge you would say so far with the sheep?
The sheep are not as hardy as cattle. Their parasites are much harder to manage in sheep than in cattle.
Yeah.
I guess that's probably the just.
We thought that sheep would fit perfectly into cattle infrastructure. Yeah. I think that was one of our early mistakes, was that we had a nice cattle farm with great infrastructure and watering stations and fences. And so we thought that we would just introduce sheep and they would act the same and need the same and do the same. Yeah. When in reality, sheep can't hardly drink out of a cow trough,
And the fence will hold cows, won't hold sheep.
Yeah, that was a rude awakening. Yeah.
I'm delighted that we have these multi-species. I wouldn't change a thing, but it's a learning curve.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's good to hear. I think that that's something that, as a regenerative farmer, I'm going to call myself a regenerative farmer now, even though I still kind of want to be. I think that that's something we all aspire to, is getting to that multi-species and being able to stack enterprises. But I do know that that is kind of challenging to do from the start as like a small regenerative farmer. And now that I've kind of been in the space and trying to learn as much as I can from these other farmers, I kind of hear that it's not like regenerative farming it's very hard to be profitable at a small scale. And you hear a lot of people say the best thing you should do is lease land and get animals on lease land. And then other people say the best thing you should do is like sell other people's meat until you can figure out your own farm. What would you say to be the most important thing for small regenerative farmers to do right now to be able to thrive in this current climate where a lot of people kind of expect their meat to be grocery store prices and things like that?
I don't think that the grocery store prices with products that meet the high animal welfare handling practices that regenerative farms have, in addition to land regeneration, that's not new, and that's probably not going away as long as the government continues to subsidize kind of the wrong things. Grass-fed beef and grass-fed lamb and pastured poultry and those types of things will always be more expensive.
Yeah.
You okay?
I'm good.
I think that consumer education is really important, and transparency and authenticity in the production system is really the way to go. We all got here because of interest in knowing your farmer. It wasn't third-party certifications. It wasn't a specific label. It wasn't any of those things. It was know the people who are growing your food. If you know your attorney and your banker and your gynecologist, then you most certainly should know, your farmer. And so I think that regenerative farmers of any size should take hold of that mindset and make that their business. Do you want to comment on that?
Yeah, to just add what she said, but add on to it, is we get that question a lot. At what scale should you operate?
Yeah.
And that is so situational.
Yeah.
There's no answer for that question. But what's important is, as Jenni alluded to earlier, you got production, I've been in the pasture, you got processing. People don't buy, consumers don't buy cows and hogs and sheep. They buy beef and pork and lamb. So you've got to produce it in the pasture. You got to be able to make the conversion to something that's monetizable. And then you got to have that marketing and distribution to get it to the people who pay you for it.
Yeah.
And as long as you've got those three legs on the stool coming up together, it can be a very low scale, a very high scale. But if you have one leg too long or too short, I don't care what the scale is, it's not going to work economically.
Yeah. Do you think that in this current age, like what you guys have built at White Oak is absolutely incredible. And I think that's what a lot of people aspire to do. You have your own processing facility. You have this incredible team of employees who helps you with all three of those stools. And you kind of hear, it's not a debate necessarily, it's just two sides to a viewpoint in the regenerative ag space, which is like more do it all yourself on your own farm, build each of those stools, or do more of a like cooperative style where you work with other farms. And for quite a few years, you're going to have to kind of specialize, not be a multi-species operation and maybe specialize in one thing and do more of like a cooperative style with other farms. What if Will Harris was starting over, and I know that this is something you probably never think about and you don't have to because you've already worked so hard to get to where you are today. If you were a new regenerative farmer in this space, which side do you think that you would lean towards?
I may be the worst person in the world to answer that question because I came up so much on one extreme.
Back when you started, there was no co-op.
Right. 25 years ago, when I started making the transition, there was nobody to, Gabe Brown was doing it in North Dakota, but I didn't know him.
Yeah, across.
So there was no one to cooperate with. So my advantage was I had inherited a nice farm with no debt that I could leverage to do things. We built this business on bank debt, but that was because I had inherited a paid-for farm that I could leverage. So that everybody doesn't have that advantage. I believe if I'd been in a co-op, we wouldn't have made it, because in a co-op, it's one person, one vote.
Yeah.
And that means if I'd had 10 other members of the co-op, when I decided to do something, I'd have to convince at least 4 others that this is what we ought to do. And there've been a lot of times that our success boiled down to me putting all the chips on the table today.
Yeah.
And it would have been hard to get 4 votes to let's put all the chips on the table today.
Yeah.
So I'm not anti-co-op, but I don't think personally, it would not have worked for me in this situation.
Yeah. I get that. Like the scale that you guys have achieved, and I really think it's a short period of time is absolutely incredible. It is something to aspire to, because like you said, you've got all 3 legs of the stool comfortably on the ground. And so now you have a strong base to build from.
I wouldn't say comfortably.
Yeah, you guys have taken out a lot of debt and have invested every penny that you guys have made and more from the bank back into the business to continue to build it. And I know that that's always like difficult for other people to agree on what one should reinvest into. So I think that there could be a lot of disagreements in that, but we're at White Oak Pastures, you guys are very clear on your mission and your 3 principles. And so having that, like, you had a single stool, and so therefore it was much easier to be able to know what exactly to invest back in. Okay, so I think that this is always a great question, and because most people are never going to be farmers, but a lot of people do believe in regenerative agriculture, and they do believe that it is what we need to be able to fix the climate crisis. And so for someone who's never going to be able to, who doesn't want to be a farmer, is just a conscious consumer, what do you think the best thing that they can do to help the mission and cause of regenerative agriculture?
So I'm a great fan of Wendell Berry, and one of his quotes, I'll probably mess it up, but something to the fact that the consumer votes every day with their food dollar on how they want the world to be. And what farmers need from consumers is support. We need, and I don't want a donation. I want you to buy a pork chop. And I want you to buy it from White Oak Pastures, but it's fine if you buy it from the Strong.Sistas or Greg Gunthorpe or Spencer Smith or Gabe Brown. But consume this change that we are part of either will happen or will not happen based on what the consumer chooses. It's simple as that. The government regulation is not going to be consequential. There's too many lobbyists with too much money. It's not going to happen. Big companies, big multinational companies are not going to just see the light and choose to do the right things. It's not going to happen. It's not the way it works. It's driven by the quarterly profit report. Farmers are not going to just say, you know what, I'm going to start doing it different. They can't afford to. And I can go on and on about with how it's not going to happen. And there's only one way it's going to happen. And that's if enough consumers decide to go ahead and pay the externalized cost of food up front and buy from a program that is farming in a way that's pleasing to them.
I think that's one of the best answers I've received to that question. It really comes down to consumers. And I think that that's one of the reasons why I enjoy sharing our journey, because ultimately, like, a conscious consumer base is going to help us achieve the goal. Like, as much as passionate you are, Jenni, you are, as I am about regenerative agriculture, we can farm and do all that we want, but it's the consumers' day-to-day decisions that will ultimately impact the final result. It's interesting that you bring up like the quarterly reports. So it's almost like consumers are voting with our spending dollars every day and are dictating these bigger decisions. So what are your thoughts on like the future of like carbon credits? So the potential of these bigger companies to,
I'm not exactly sure how it would actually be implemented, but supporting these farms, they would get some sort of financial incentive to be able to have carbon credits.
You know what carbon credits and unicorns have in common?
Oh,
I've heard a lot about both of them, never seen either one. You know, a lot of talking about carbon credits. I don't know anybody that's ever cashed a check.
yeah.
I'd be willing to cash one, but you know, maybe it'll happen one day, and
Yeah.
maybe I'll see a unicorn.
Yeah. Okay, that's a good answer. Okay, so what are you guys excited about at White Oak Pastures? What's something new that's been going on or something that is coming up in the future?
So the year of 2021 for us is a focus on education. We have had workshops that we have done that are a day or a couple of days, and those have been successful, but not not wildly successful. We've had an internship for the past 4 or 5 years, and that's been successful. But COVID and the spotlight shown on resilient food production systems has really increased awareness with people who want to participate in regenerative agriculture. So we are in conversations with universities and other professional outfits to bring more people to Bluffton to teach them about regenerative agriculture. We don't exactly know how that's going to shape up, but enhancing our internship program and focusing more on workshops is really where we're headed. We're also investing in some infrastructure like an RV park to host people a little bit more easily. So we're excited about that. We're building a new admin building. Every office that anybody has ever parked in has been a building of some other sort. Currently, customer service is in the front of the red meat abattoir. Admin is in the event space, which is the church. So finally, we're going. Yeah, this is the courthouse, which Dad turned into an office. So finally, we will have an actual office. So I'm very, very excited about that. But I guess those would be the major points of focus. Obviously, solar and raising sheep under solar panels was a huge focus in 2020 and will continue to be in 2021. But bringing people to Bluffton and teaching them more about the benefits of high animal welfare systems that are better for the soil and better for rural communities is where we're headed. And investing in our online store. In 3 weeks, we will launch our new website, which if you can't see the gray hair, it's definitely there. But we are really excited about getting on the Shopify platform. So ordering online and the type of marketing and targeting and things that we can do on Shopify are going to be unlimited. So I'm really, really excited about that, but also very nervous.
Yeah, that's a huge change, but that's awesome. Nice. I think that it's really great that you guys are focusing on education. I think that that's ultimately going to be Sarah and I's purpose here at Angel Acres. We're never going to be able to be at a scale anywhere close to White Oak Pastures, but I have a personal passion for educating and trying to create more informed consumers. And that just ties back to what we were saying before. The best thing that someone can do to support regenerative agriculture is share these things. So like share someone's Instagram post or YouTube video about regenerative agriculture with a family member on their Facebook page with their friends. Like little acts like that will build up over time. And so it's great that White Oak Pastures is creating more educational content. So you guys should definitely follow them on Instagram, Facebook, follow their website. And if you guys could share all of those, because that just helps increase awareness. And like Mr. Will said, if you don't buy from White Oak, if you don't buy from Strong.Sistas, like find your local farmer and support that, because that's casting a vote for what we want to see in a resilient food system that's helping repair the soil and sequestering carbon. So yeah. Do you guys have any final notes of wisdom or advice?
No, I'm not the wisest person here. Do y'all have any final advice?
Good luck.
Well, I really appreciate you guys. I appreciate our friendship, and I thank you guys for coming on here. I'm excited to see you in a few months. We'll come down to visit. But yeah, okay.
Can't wait.
Thanks, guys.